The winter sun cast long shadows across the dusty Montana territory as Clara Vaughn clutched the crumpled advertisement in her trembling hands. The paper had traveled with her for over 1,000 miles, its creases deepening with each passing day like the lines of doubt etching themselves across her heart. "Respectable rancher seeks bride of good character and sturdy constitution," it read. The words now faded from her constant handling, words that had promised escape, security, perhaps even a semblance of peace. But love, that was a fancy Clara had abandoned long ago, alongside the graves of everyone who had ever claimed to care for her. Montana Territory, 1878. The train whistle pierced the crisp autumn air as it slowed into the small but growing settlement of Whiteridge. Clara adjusted her worn bonnet and gathered her meager belongings, one trunk containing all that remained of her 23 years of life. The journey from Boston had been interminable, each mile carrying her further from the familiar and deeper into uncertainty. Whiteridge Station. "Final stop before Bozeman," the conductor called, his voice barely audible over the hissing steam and squealing brakes. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as the train lurched to a stop. She had exchanged letters with Colton Quinn for 3 months before accepting his proposal, if one could call his businesslike offer a proposal. She knew little about him beyond his ownership of a cattle ranch, his need for a wife to help manage his household, and his promise of respectful treatment. It was more than she had dared hope for after fleeing the oppressive household of her uncle, where grief had been her only companion since her parents' deaths 5 years prior. The platform was busy with cowboys, merchants, and travelers, but Clara's attention was drawn to a tall figure standing slightly apart from the crowd. His broad shoulders were squared beneath a dust-coated duster, and his face was partially obscured by the brim of a well-worn Stetson. She knew instantly it was him, Colton Quinn, her future husband, a stranger who held her fate in hands she had yet to see. Clara gathered her courage and descended from the train, her boots touching Montana soil for the first time. The air was different here, sharper, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and prairie grass rather than the coal smoke and sewage of Boston. She straightened her back, determined not to appear as frightened as she felt. The man approached her with measured steps, removing his hat as he drew near. His hair was the color of burnished copper in the late afternoon sun, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue, clear and assessing as they swept over her face. "Miss Vaughn." His voice was deep, touched with the faint drawl of the West. "Mr. Quinn," she confirmed, offering a polite nod instead of her hand. She wouldn't pretend enthusiasm she didn't feel. This was a transaction, not a romance. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps disappointment at her cool greeting, or simply recognition of the wariness she couldn't quite conceal. "Welcome to Whiteridge," he said, replacing his hat. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "As comfortable as can be expected," Clara replied, unwilling to complain about the hard seats and endless jolting that had left her body aching. Complaints would not endear her to this man, and she needed this arrangement to work. "I appreciate you meeting me." Colton nodded, taking her trunk with ease. "The wagon's this way. Town's grown some since I wrote you last. Nearly 1,500 souls now, with the mine bringing in new folk every month." Clara followed him, taking in the muddy Main Street lined with wooden buildings. Whiteridge was certainly larger than she had imagined from his letters, but it was still raw compared to Boston, a place in the making rather than one with centuries of history. "Your letters mentioned you have a housekeeper," she asked, trying to recall the details he had shared about his household. "Mrs. Abernathy. Been with me since I built the main house 3 years back. She comes in days, lives in town with her son." He helped her onto the wagon bench before climbing up beside her. "She'll be there when we arrive. Thought you might appreciate another woman's presence." The consideration surprised Clara, though she was careful not to show it. "That was thoughtful, thank you." The wagon pulled away from the station, and Clara felt the eyes of townsfolk following them. No doubt they knew exactly who she was and why she had come. The mail-order bride, purchased like a heifer at auction. The thought made her cheeks burn with humiliation. "I should make something clear, Mr. Quinn," she said as they left the town behind. "I've come here to be your wife in name, to keep your home and fulfill the duties we discussed in our correspondence. But I harbor no romantic illusions about our arrangement." Colton's hands tightened slightly on the reins, but his expression remained impassive. "I never asked for romance, Miss Vaughn." "No, you didn't," she agreed. "Which is why I accepted your offer over others. I appreciate honesty, Mr. Quinn. False promises and pretty words are worth less than the paper they're written on." He glanced at her then, his gaze lingering on her face. "Sounds like someone's made you promises they didn't keep." Clara turned away, fixing her eyes on the distant mountains. "Everyone makes promises they don't keep, Mr. Quinn, especially when it comes to matters of the heart. Love is a convenient fiction, nothing more." The wagon rolled over a rut, jostling them both. When Colton spoke again, his voice was quiet but firm. "Then let me be the first truth you know, Miss Vaughn. I may not have offered you poetry and passion, but every word I've written to you has been honest. And every promise I make to you will be kept." He paused, his eyes returning to the road. "That much I can give you, even if you've no use for love." Clara said nothing, but something in her chest tightened at his words. She had not expected sincerity from this rough-hewn cowboy, and she wasn't sure what to do with it now that it was offered. The Quinn ranch came into view as they crested a gentle rise, a sprawling property nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. The main house was larger than Clara had anticipated, a two-story structure of solid logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and beyond them stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the fading light. "It's beautiful," she murmured, the words escaping before she could stop them. Colton's expression softened slightly. "It's taken 8 years to build it to what you see. Started with nothing but a claim and 20 head of cattle." There was pride in his voice, but not boastfulness. "Land's good here. Harsh in winter, but it rewards those who respect it." As they approached the house, Clara saw a plump, gray-haired woman emerge onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Abernathy, she presumed. The housekeeper smiled warmly as Colton drew the wagon to a stop. "About time you got back," the older woman called. "Supper's nearly ready, and I've got the blue room all prepared for Miss Vaughn." Clara felt a surge of relief. She would have her own room, at least for now. The thought of immediately sharing a bed with a stranger had been one of her greatest apprehensions. Colton helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong but careful at her waist. "Mrs. Abernathy's been cooking all day," he said quietly. "Might be wise to show appreciation regardless of how tired you are." Clara bristled at the instruction but swallowed her retort. He was right, of course. Alienating the housekeeper would be foolish. "Mrs. Abernathy," she greeted, summoning a smile as she approached the porch. "How kind of you to prepare a room for me. Something smells wonderful." The older woman beamed. "Roast beef and apple pie, dear. Thought you deserved a proper Montana welcome after such a journey. Come inside now and warm yourself while Mr. Quinn brings in your things." The interior of the house was surprisingly refined for a bachelor rancher's home. The main room featured sturdy but well-crafted furniture, clean floors covered with woven rugs, and bookshelves lined with volumes that caught Clara's immediate attention. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire already blazing to ward off the evening chill. "Mr. Quinn said you were a teacher back east," Mrs. Abernathy remarked, noticing Clara's interest in the books. "He made sure to order some new ones from Denver last month. Said a lady of education would appreciate good reading material." Clara glanced back toward the door, where Colton was bringing in her trunk. Another unexpected consideration. She had mentioned her brief teaching career in one letter, but hadn't expected him to remember, much less act upon the information. "The blue room is upstairs, first door on the right," Mrs. Abernathy continued, leading her toward a staircase of polished pine. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Mr. Quinn had indoor plumbing put in last year. Very modern." Clara followed, increasingly bewildered by the comfort and thoughtfulness evident in the home. This was not the rough cabin she had steeled herself to endure. The blue room, when Mrs. Abernathy opened the door, was spacious and welcoming, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a washstand with a china basin and pitcher, a small writing desk, and a wardrobe for her clothing. "It's lovely," Clara said, genuine surprise in her voice. "Mr. Quinn wanted you to be comfortable," Mrs. Abernathy said simply. "I'll leave you to freshen up. Supper in half an hour." When the older woman had gone, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar, in the home of a man she barely knew, about to begin a life she couldn't fully imagine. Yet the terror she had expected to feel was tempered by confusion. Colton Quinn was not what she had prepared herself for. The thoughtful touches throughout the house spoke of a man who had considered her comfort, her needs, her interests. It made her uneasy. Kindness could be a mask for ulterior motives. Her uncle had seemed kind at first too, before his true nature emerged. She would not be fooled again by superficial gestures. Clara splashed water on her face and changed her travel-stained blouse for a clean one. She pinned her dark hair more neatly and pinched some color into her pale cheeks. Whatever Colton Quinn's true character might be, she would face him with dignity. Downstairs, the table was set with simple but clean dishware. Colton stood when she entered, another unexpected courtesy. "Mrs. Abernathy's gone home for the evening," he explained. "Said she'd be back in the morning to help you get settled. Hope you don't mind it being just us for supper." Clara hesitated. Propriety dictated they shouldn't be alone before their marriage, but the practical realities of frontier life made such concern seem trivial. "When do you intend for us to marry, Mr. Quinn?" she asked directly, taking the seat he offered. Colton sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral. "Preacher comes through town every third Sunday. That's 8 days from now, unless you'd prefer more time." "No," Clara said quickly. "There's no sense in delay. We've made our arrangement and you've fulfilled your part by bringing me here. I should fulfill mine." Something like disappointment flickered across his features as he served her a portion of roast beef. "This isn't just about the arrangement, Miss Vaughn. I want you to be certain." "I made my decision when I boarded the train in Boston," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I don't require additional time." They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of cutlery against plates and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Clara found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. Colton Quinn was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, likely in his early 30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. His hands were calloused, his forearms powerful beneath rolled-up shirt sleeves. But it was the careful way he handled the china, the measured precision of his movements, that intrigued her most. There was nothing careless about this man. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. Your letters mentioned cattle, but little else. Colton seemed to relax slightly at the neutral topic. Started with 20 head, as I mentioned, now running close to 500. Got 8 cowhands who live in the bunkhouse most of the year, good men, loyal. 40 acres under cultivation for feed, planning to expand next year if the market holds. It sounds substantial, Clara observed. You've built all this yourself. Had help, he corrected. My foreman, Daniel Morgan, has been with me from the beginning, and I learned from mistakes, lost nearly half my herd the first winter. He hesitated, then added, my father was a rancher in Texas. He taught me the basics before he died. The rest I figured out along the way. Clara sensed there was more to that story but didn't press. And why Montana? Why not remain in Texas? A shadow passed over his face. Texas had too many ghosts, wanted something different, something mine. The answer resonated with Clara more than she cared to admit. Wasn't that precisely what had driven her to answer his advertisement? The need to escape ghosts, to claim something of her own. What about you? Colton asked, turning the conversation. Your letters mentioned teaching, but not why you decided to become a mail-order bride. Most women with education have other options. Clara set down her fork, considering how much to reveal. My parents died of influenza 5 years ago. I went to live with my uncle, who initially supported my teaching, but his circumstances changed, and so did his expectations. He arranged a marriage for me to a business associate, a man 3 times my age with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous wives. She kept her voice detached, as though telling someone else's story. I chose to seek a different future. Colton's expression darkened. Your uncle would force you to such a match. Force is a strong word, Clara replied, though it was accurate. Let's say he made it clear that I had outlived my welcome in his home unless I complied with his wishes. And so you answered my advertisement. Clara met his gaze directly. Your terms were clear, your expectations reasonable, and you requested a partner rather than a possession. It seemed preferable. Not exactly a ringing endorsement, Colton remarked, a hint of wry humor in his voice. The unexpected comment startled a small laugh from Clara. No, I suppose not. But honesty was one of your requirements, was it not? His eyes warmed slightly. It was, and I appreciate it, Miss Vaughn. Clara, she said suddenly, if we're to be married in 8 days, perhaps we should use our given names. Clara, he repeated, the sound of her name in his deep voice sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. And I'm Colton, though most folks around here call me Colt. The rest of the meal passed more comfortably, as Colton told her about Whiteridge and its inhabitants, the mercantile owner who extended credit during hard winters, the doctor who had once been an army surgeon, the school teacher who would likely welcome Clara's assistance if she wished to continue teaching. It painted a picture of community that Clara hadn't anticipated, having imagined a more isolated existence. After supper, Colton showed her the rest of the house, his study where he kept the ranch accounts, the small library that doubled as a music room with a piano that had belonged to his mother, the kitchen with its modern iron stove and well-stocked pantry. You'll have free reign of the house, of course, he told her. Change whatever you like to make it comfortable. Mrs. Abernathy will help with the heavier work, but she'll take direction from you once you're settled. Clara nodded, still trying to reconcile this considerate man with the pragmatic, business-like letters they had exchanged. And what will my duties be exactly? Beyond keeping the house, I mean. Colton leaned against the kitchen doorway, considering her question. Hadn't thought of it in terms of duties, to be honest. I need a partner, Clara. Someone to share the work, yes, but also the decisions. Someone who'll stand with me when times get hard, and they will get hard. Winters here can be brutal, markets unpredictable. He paused, searching for words. I'm not looking for a servant. I'm looking for a wife." "Those terms are often synonymous," Clara observed, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Not here," Colton said firmly. "Not with me." Clara wanted to believe him. The yearning to trust his words surprised her with its intensity. But experience had taught her that men's promises were as changeable as the wind and twice as insubstantial. "It's been a long day," she said finally, retreating behind politeness. "If you don't mind, I think I'll retire." Colton straightened, respecting her withdrawal. "Of course. Breakfast is usually at sunrise, but sleep as long as you need. No one expects you to adjust immediately." He walked her to the foot of the stairs, maintaining a respectful distance that Clara both appreciated and found strangely disappointing. "Good night, Clara," he said softly. "I'm glad you're here." The simple sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "Good night, Colton," she managed before climbing the stairs to her room. Alone, Clara moved to the window and looked out at the Montana night. Stars blazed in a sky vaster than any she had seen in Boston, and the silhouettes of mountains rose like sentinels against the horizon. This wild, beautiful land was her home now, and the man downstairs, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindnesses, was to be her husband. She had come prepared for hardship, for loneliness, for a life of pragmatic compromise. She had not prepared for Colton Quinn with his clear blue eyes and careful consideration. She had not prepared for the possibility that her carefully constructed walls might not be as impenetrable as she had believed. Clara turned from the window, unpinning her hair with determined movements. She would not be swayed by superficial impressions. Time would reveal Colton Quinn's true nature, and she would be ready when it did. Love might be a lie, but survival was not. And Clara Vaughn had become very good at surviving. The dawn came early in Montana, painting the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold that gradually gave way to brilliant blue. Clara had slept fitfully, waking often to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the call of night birds, the whisper of wind through pine needles. When the first light filtered through her curtains, she rose and dressed in one of her sturdier dresses, a practical garment of navy cotton with minimal fuss. She found Colton in the kitchen, brewing coffee on the stove. He wore a clean flannel shirt and denim trousers, his hair still damp from washing. The domesticity of the scene struck Clara as oddly intimate. "Morning," he greeted, looking up as she entered. "Coffee, please," she replied, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "Is Mrs. Abernathy not here yet?" "Mondays she comes a bit later. Her son works the early shift at the mine, and she sees him off." Colton poured coffee into a mug and placed it before her. "Hope you don't mind a simple breakfast. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage eggs and bacon without burning the place down." Clara found herself smiling despite her resolve to maintain emotional distance. "I can help. I may not be an accomplished chef, but I've fed myself for years." Together they prepared a simple meal, moving around each other in the kitchen with surprising ease. Clara discovered that Colton was methodical in his actions, cleaning as he worked rather than leaving a mess for later. It was a trait she appreciated, having lived with her uncle's careless habits for too long. As they ate, Colton outlined his plans for the day. "Thought I might show you around the ranch this morning, introduce you to the hands. Then we could ride into town if you'd like meet some folks, pick up anything you need." "That sounds agreeable," Clara said, surprised by his consideration in seeking her input. "Though I confess I'm not much of a rider." "We'll take the wagon then," he replied easily. "No rush to get you on horseback until you're ready." The morning tour of the ranch revealed the full scope of Colton's operation. The property covered nearly 2,000 acres, with natural boundaries formed by a river to the east and foothills to the west. The cattle were primarily Herefords, their reddish-brown bodies dotting the pastures. 5 cowhands were working that day, and Colton introduced Clara to each one, including his foreman, Daniel Morgan, a soft-spoken man with graying temples who tipped his hat respectfully. "Miss Vaughn," Morgan greeted her. "Boss has been talking about your arrival for weeks." "Good to finally meet you." Clara glanced at Colton, whose ears had reddened slightly at Morgan's words. "Has he indeed? I hope his expectations won't be disappointed." Morgan's weathered face creased in a smile. "Mr. Quinn's a man who knows his own mind, madam. If he chose you, I reckon he chose well." The simple faith in the statement disarmed Clara. These men respected Colton, that much was clear, and Colton treated them with a natural authority tempered by genuine regard. It was another piece of the puzzle that was Colton Quinn a man who inspired loyalty without demanding it. The ride into Whiteridge took nearly an hour, giving Clara time to observe the surrounding countryside in daylight. The landscape was more varied than she had initially perceived, rolling grasslands giving way to stands of pine, aspen groves gleaming like gold coins in the morning sun, and always the mountains in the distance, their peaks still dusted with early snow. "It's magnificent," she admitted, unable to contain her appreciation. "So different from Boston." "Takes some getting used to," Colton acknowledged. "The space can feel overwhelming at first, but after a while anything less feels confining." In town, Colton's prediction about Clara's reception proved accurate. News of the mail-order bride's arrival had spread rapidly, and townspeople found various excuses to introduce themselves as Colton guided Clara through the mercantile, the small dressmaker's shop, and finally, to a modest restaurant for lunch. Most were genuinely welcoming, though Clara detected curious assessment in their gazes. She was being measured, she knew, judged for her fitness as Colton Quinn's wife. It was uncomfortable but not unexpected. Small communities had their own rules, their own ways of accepting newcomers. The most significant encounter came at the restaurant, where they were approached by a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Judge Harrington," Colton greeted him, standing respectfully. "May I introduce Miss Clara Vaughn, soon to be my wife?" "Clara, Judge Harrington is our circuit judge and one of the founding members of Whiteridge." "Miss Vaughn," the judge said warmly, taking her offered hand. "A pleasure to meet you. We've been wondering what sort of woman would capture our Mr. Quinn's attention." "He's been one of our most confirmed bachelors." Clara smiled politely. "I believe it was less my charms and more my practical qualifications, Judge. Mr. Quinn advertised for a capable wife, not a romantic interest." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly at her frankness, but his smile deepened. "Honesty as well as beauty. You've done well, Quinn." He turned back to Clara. "Will you be joining us for services on Sunday? Reverend Caldwell would be delighted to meet you before performing the ceremony." "Of course," Clara replied, though the thought of being the center of attention in a church full of strangers filled her with dread. After the judge departed, Clara noticed Colton watching her with a slight frown. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," he said, then shook his head. "No, that's not true. I'm just wondering why you're so determined to convince everyone that there's nothing but practicality between us." Clara stiffened. "Isn't that the truth? We've made a business arrangement, Colton. A mutually beneficial one, but an arrangement nonetheless. I see no reason to pretend otherwise." "And is that all you want it to be?" he asked quietly, his blue eyes intent on her face. The question hit Clara like a physical blow. What did she want? She had convinced herself that she wanted security, safety, a home of her own, things she could achieve through this pragmatic marriage. But sitting across from Colton, Seeing the genuine question in his eyes, she felt a treacherous yearning for something more. "What I want is irrelevant," she said finally. "I've learned not to expect more than what's been promised." Colton's expression softened with what looked distressingly like understanding. "Clara, who hurt you so badly that you're afraid to even hope for happiness." The gentle perception in his voice threatened to unravel her carefully maintained composure. Clara looked away, blinking rapidly against unexpected tears. "We should return to the ranch," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Mrs. Abernathy will be wondering where we are." Colton didn't press, but as they left the restaurant, he placed a gentle hand at the small of her back, not constraining, simply supporting. The warmth of that touch lingered long after they had climbed back into the wagon. The week leading up to their wedding passed in a blur of activity as Clara established her place in the household. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a treasure, showing Clara the rhythms of ranch life without attempting to dictate how things should be done. Together they inventoried supplies, planned meals, and discussed the particular challenges of maintaining a home so far from city conveniences. Colton was busy with ranch work, often leaving before dawn and returning late in the afternoon. He respected Clara's space, never intruding on her privacy, but each evening they shared supper and conversation. Despite her determination to keep emotional distance, Clara found herself looking forward to these quiet hours together. She learned that Colton had a quick mind and dry wit, that he read extensively during the winter months when ranch work slowed, that he played chess with a strategic patience that revealed much about his character. He asked thoughtful questions about her teaching experience, her interests, her opinions on everything from politics to literature. He listened to her answers with genuine attention, sometimes challenging her views but never dismissing them. It was disarming, this careful courtship that Colton seemed determined to pursue, despite the fact that their marriage was already arranged. Even more disarming was Clara's growing awareness that she was responding to it, like a flower turning toward the sun after a long winter. 3 days before their wedding, Clara was in the kitchen baking bread, a skill she had developed during leaner times with her uncle, when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Looking out the window, she saw an unfamiliar buggy driven by a slender woman with auburn hair. Beside her sat a young girl of perhaps 7 or 8. Curious, Clara wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch just as the woman drew the buggy to a stop. "Hello there," the visitor called cheerfully. "You must be Clara Vaughn. I'm Eliza Parker, the schoolteacher. And this is my daughter, Emily." Clara greeted them warmly, inviting them inside for tea. As she served her unexpected guests in the parlor, Eliza explained the purpose of their visit. "I heard you were a teacher back east," she said, her green eyes bright with interest. "Our school has grown so much this past year with all the new families coming to work the mine. I've got nearly 40 children now, all ages, and I'm at my wits' end trying to give them all proper attention." "It must be challenging," Clara agreed, remembering her own classroom of 20 children in Boston. "The school board has authorized hiring an assistant," Eliza continued, "but qualified teachers are scarce out here. When I heard about your background, I hoped you might consider the position. It would only be 3 days a week, so you'd still have time for your duties here at the ranch." Clara was taken aback by the offer. She had loved teaching, had mourned the loss of her position when her uncle had forced her to resign. The thought of returning to the classroom sent a thrill of excitement through her. "I would need to discuss it with Colton," she said cautiously. "We haven't spoken about my taking employment outside the home." Eliza smiled knowingly. "Actually, it was Colton who suggested it. He stopped by the school yesterday and mentioned your experience, said you might miss teaching and that I should speak with you directly." Clara stared at her in astonishment. Colton had done this, had considered what she might miss from her former life, and sought to provide an opportunity for her to continue it. Little Emily, who had been quietly sipping her tea, spoke up suddenly. "Papa says Mr. Quinn is the best man in the territory. He helped us fix our roof last winter when Papa hurt his back." Eliza smiled fondly at her daughter. "Emily's father passed away 2 years ago, but she still calls my brother Papa. He's been a father to her since we came to Whiteridge." She turned back to Clara. "Thomas, my brother, is right about Colton Quinn. He's one of the good ones, Clara. There aren't many men who would consider a wife's interests beyond their own home." Clara found herself unable to respond. Each day seemed to bring new evidence that contradicted her assumptions about Colton, about men in general. Each day made it harder to maintain the protective wall around her heart. When Colton returned that evening, Clara was waiting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. He approached slowly, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. "You had visitors today," he said, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. "Yes. Eliza Parker and her daughter. She offered me a position as assistant teacher." Clara watched his face carefully. "She said you suggested it." Colton leaned against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful. "You mentioned teaching in your letters. Said it was the happiest time of your life before your parents died. Seemed a shame for you to give it up entirely if you didn't want to. Most men would expect their wives to focus solely on home and family." "I'm not most men, Clara." He met her gaze directly. "And you're not most women. I didn't bring you here to clip your wings. I brought you here to build a life together, one that gives us both purpose." Clara felt something shift inside her, a crack appearing in the wall she had so carefully constructed. "I don't understand you, Colton Quinn." A smile touched his lips. "Is that such a bad thing? Might keep things interesting for the next 50 years or so." The casual reference to their future decades stretching ahead of them together struck Clara with unexpected force. Colton truly saw this as a lifelong commitment, not merely a convenient arrangement. "I told Eliza I would need to discuss it with you," she said, returning to the original topic. "If you truly have no objection, I would like to accept her offer." "No objection at all," Colton assured her, "though I may need to have words with some of the older boys if they give you trouble. Teenage boys can be mighty disrespectful to a pretty young teacher." The compliment, delivered so casually, brought warmth to Clara's cheeks. "I'm perfectly capable of handling unruly students, Mr. Quinn. I once had a boy twice my size try to overturn my desk in protest of his grammar lesson. He found himself writing lines for 2 weeks afterward." Colton's laugh rang out, deep and genuine. "I don't doubt it for a minute. You've got steel in your spine, Clara Vaughn. It's one of the things I admire most about you." The simple statement of admiration caught Clara by surprise. No man had ever expressed admiration for her strength, only for her appearance or her quiet demeanor, qualities that served their convenience rather than reflecting her character. "Thank you," she said softly, uncertain how else to respond. Colton straightened, a hint of awkwardness replacing his usual confidence. "There's something else I've been meaning to discuss with you, about our wedding." Clara tensed, wondering if he had reconsidered. "Yes. I know we agreed to marry this Sunday, and I'm not suggesting we change that. But I want you to be sure, Clara. If you need more time, I don't," she interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "I made my decision, Colton. I don't regret coming here." Relief flickered across his face, followed by something warmer. "Good, that's good," he hesitated, then continued. "There's a tradition here for weddings. The community holds a dance afterward. Nothing fancy, just music and celebration at the town hall. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned it to you." Clara nodded. "She did. I brought a suitable dress." "The thing is," Colton continued, seeming uncharacteristically nervous, "there's usually a first dance for the bride and groom. I'm not much of a dancer, but I can manage a waltz if you're willing." The thought of being in Colton's arms, even in the formal context of a dance, sent an unexpected flutter through Clara's stomach. "I would be honored," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Colton's smile transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes. "I'll try not to step on your toes too badly." As dusk deepened around them, they remained on the porch, talking of small things, the progress of the bread Clara had baked, the new calf born that morning, the plans for expanding the vegetable garden next spring. It was comfortable, this quiet sharing of thoughts and observations. It felt, Clara realized with a start, like the beginnings of a partnership, perhaps even the beginnings of something more. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Clara stood before the small mirror in her room, studying her reflection with critical eyes. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant dove gray silk with delicate pearl buttons and lace at the collar and cuffs. It had been her mother's, carefully preserved all these years, the only truly fine thing Clara had brought with her from Boston. Mrs. Abernathy had helped arrange her dark hair in a sophisticated knot, with a few curls framing her face. A spray of white wildflowers, gathered that morning by Colton's foreman Daniel Morgan as a wedding gift, served as her only adornment. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Abernathy declared, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Like a proper bride, a proper bride." The words echoed in Clara's mind as she descended the stairs to where Colton waited. This was not the wedding she had imagined as a girl, with family surrounding her and a long courtship preceding it. Yet as she saw Colton turn toward her, his eyes widening with undisguised appreciation, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended conventional expectations. Colton wore a formal black suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. His copper hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, but it was the expression in his eyes a mixture of admiration, tenderness, and something deeper she couldn't quite name that caught Clara's breath in her throat. "Clara," he said softly, stepping forward to take her gloved hand, "you are beyond words." For once, Clara allowed herself to accept the compliment without suspicion or deflection. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The small church in Whiteridge was filled to capacity when they arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the marriage of one of their most respected citizens. Clara felt a momentary panic at being the center of so much attention, but Colton's steady presence beside her calmed her racing heart. Reverend Caldwell, a kindly man with spectacles perched on his nose, conducted the ceremony with dignity and warmth. When the moment came to exchange vows, Clara found herself focusing entirely on Colton's face, the sincerity in his blue eyes as he promised to honor, cherish, and protect her all the days of his life. When her turn came, Clara spoke the traditional words with a steadiness that surprised her. "I, Clara Vaughn, take you, Colton Quinn, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." As Colton slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, another surprise. As she had expected only the practical legal bond of marriage, not the sentiment of a ring, Clara felt the last of her defensive walls begin to crumble. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Caldwell declared. "You may kiss your bride." For a moment, Clara tensed. They had never discussed this aspect of the ceremony, had never so much as touched beyond the most casual contact. But as Colton leaned toward her, his eyes asking silent permission, She found herself tilting her face up to meet him. His lips touched hers with exquisite gentleness, a kiss that asked rather than demanded, that offered rather than took. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, Clara felt something awaken within her, something she had thought long dead. The wedding celebration at the town hall was a boisterous affair, with tables laden with food contributed by what seemed like every woman in the community. A small band played lively tunes, and children darted between the adults, their excitement adding to the festive atmosphere. Clara found herself welcomed with genuine warmth. Women who had been strangers days before now offered advice, recipes, and invitations. Men congratulated Colton with hearty backslaps and teasing comments that made him laugh and occasionally blush. When the time came for their first dance, the floor cleared and the band struck up a waltz. Colton led Clara to the center, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "Remember, I warned you about my dancing," he murmured as they began to move. "You're doing fine," Clara assured him, surprised to find that he moved with more grace than he had led her to believe. "Better than fine, actually." A smile tugged at his lips. "My mother insisted I learn. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." The image made Clara laugh, the sound rising freely for perhaps the first time since her arrival in Montana. Colton's eyes brightened at the sound, and he drew her slightly closer as they continued to waltz. "I like your laugh," he said quietly. "Hope to hear it more often." The simple statement, delivered without pretense or expectation, touched Clara deeply. "I haven't had much cause for laughter these past years," she admitted. "Then I'll have to give you cause," Colton replied, his voice carrying a promise that made Clara's heart beat faster. As the evening progressed, Clara danced with several other men, Daniel Morgan, who moved with surprising elegance for a weathered cowhand; Judge Harrington, who regaled her with stories of Whiteridge's early days; and Thomas Parker, Eliza's brother, who thanked her for agreeing to help at the school. But it was always to Colton that her eyes returned, watching as he danced politely with the wives of friends or spoke earnestly with the men about cattle prices and weather predictions. This man was her husband now. The thought was still startling, still new. As tradition dictated, they were the first to leave the celebration, departing amid good-natured teasing and well wishes. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the darkness broken only by starlight and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. Clara's nervousness returned as they approached the house. This was their wedding night. Whatever Colton's consideration thus far, he was still a man, and she was now legally his wife. The physical aspects of marriage had been another point not discussed between them. When they reached the house, Colton helped her down from the wagon, his touch as careful as always. Inside, lamps had been left burning low by Mrs. Abernathy, casting a warm glow over the familiar rooms. Clara stood in the parlor, uncertain as Colton removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. "Or perhaps something stronger? I have a bottle of good whiskey I've been saving for a special occasion." The normality of the question eased some of Clara's tension. "Tea would be nice, thank you." In the kitchen, they moved around each other with the ease of a week's practice, Clara preparing the tea while Colton sliced the cake Mrs. Abernathy had left for them. When they were seated at the kitchen table, cups steaming between them, Colton finally addressed the unspoken concern. "I meant what I said in church today, Clara. I will honor you all the days of my life. That includes tonight." He met her gaze directly. "I won't come to your room unless invited. This marriage will proceed at a pace you set, not one I demand." Clara stared at him, astonished once again by this man who consistently defied her expectations. "But legally you're my wife, yes. But in truth, you're your own woman, Clara. Always have been, always will be. He took a sip of tea before continuing. I didn't bring you here just to warm my bed. I brought you here because I believe we could build something good together, a partnership, a home, maybe someday a family. But all that takes time and trust. Trust doesn't come easily to me, Clara admitted softly. I know. Colton's smile was gentle. That's why I'm willing to wait, however long it takes. Something broke open inside Clara, then a dam of emotion she had held back for so long that she had forgotten its existence. To be seen so clearly, to be offered such respect and patience, was overwhelming. Why? She whispered, the question encompassing all the contradictions this man presented. Why go to such lengths for a woman you barely knew? Why advertise for a wife and then treat her like a woman worthy of love? Colton finished when she faltered. The word hung between them, powerful and frightening. Love. The very concept Clara had dismissed as fiction, as a convenient lie told to naive girls. Yes, she managed, her voice barely audible. Colton reached across the table, his hand covering hers with gentle warmth. Because from your first letter, I saw something in your words, a strength, an intelligence, a depth of feeling carefully guarded. I saw a woman who had been hurt but not broken, a woman I wanted to know. His thumb traced a gentle circle on her wrist. And every day since you arrived has only confirmed what I suspected. You're extraordinary, Clara Quinn. The new name, spoken with such quiet certainty, sent a shiver through Clara. She was Clara Quinn now, this man's wife, this man who looked at her as though she were precious beyond measure. I don't know how to do this, she confessed, turning her hand to clasp his. I don't know how to trust, how to believe that you are real. Then let me be the first truth you know, Colton said, echoing his words from their first meeting. Let me show you day by day that some promises are kept, that some words are honest, that love, real love, isn't a lie but the deepest truth there is. Clara looked into his eyes and saw no deception there, only earnest hope and tender regard. And for the first time in years she allowed herself to hope, not certainty, not yet, but hope, fragile, tentative, beautiful hope. I would like that, she whispered, to learn that truth with you. Colton's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He raised her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. Then we'll begin that lesson tonight, Mrs. Quinn, and continue it all the days of our lives. The weeks following their wedding unfolded in a rhythm of discovery of each other, of their shared home, of the community they were both now part of. Clara began her work at the school, finding joy in the eager minds of frontier children, whose hunger for knowledge reminded her why she had loved teaching. 3 days a week, she rode to town with Colton in the morning, returning with him or with Thomas Parker in the afternoon. At home, she gradually made the ranch house truly hers, rearranging furniture, adding touches of beauty, wildflowers in summer, pine boughs in winter, and cooking meals that reflected her own tastes as well as Colton's. Mrs. Abernathy remained a treasured help, but increasingly the household reflected Clara's influence. True to his word, Colton never pressured Clara for physical intimacy. They continued to occupy separate bedrooms, though their evenings were spent together reading by the fire, playing chess, talking of their days. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, Clara sewing or writing letters while Colton reviewed ranch accounts. It was in these quiet moments that Clara found herself studying her husband, noting the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the careful precision with which he handled books and papers, the occasional half-smile that would touch his lips when he came across something amusing. She found herself cataloging these details, treasuring them, building a picture of the man she had married that grew more complex, and more compelling with each passing day. Winter descended on Montana with fierce determination, transforming the landscape into a world of white and blue. Snow piled in drifts against the house, and the temperature dropped so low that breath froze in the air. It was Clara's first experience of true Western winter, and despite Colton's warnings, the reality exceeded her imagination. Yet there was beauty in it, too, the crystalline clarity of the air, the way sunlight transformed ordinary scenes into fairy-tale vistas, the profound silence of snowfall. And there was unexpected intimacy in being confined to the house during the worst storms. The outside world reduced to the howling wind, while inside, warmth and companionship created a sanctuary. It was during one such storm, nearly 3 months after their wedding, that the nature of their marriage shifted irrevocably. The blizzard had blown in suddenly, forcing Colton and his men to abandon work and seek shelter. For 2 days, the storm raged unabated, the wind screaming around the eaves of the house like a living thing. On the 3rd evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, a tremendous crack split the air, followed by a crash that shook the house. Colton was on his feet instantly. "Stay here," he ordered, reaching for his coat and a lantern. "You can't go out in this," Clara protested, alarmed by the determination in his expression. "I have to check the barn." That sound he didn't finish, but Clara understood. The animals were vulnerable, and Colton would never leave them to suffer if something had happened to their shelter. "Then I'm coming with you," she declared, already reaching for her own coat. "Clara, it's dangerous, all the more reason you shouldn't go alone." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm your wife, Colton, your partner. We face dangers together." Something flashed in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or deeper emotion, before he nodded tersely. "Stay close to me. The wind can disorient you in seconds." They battled their way across the yard, the wind tearing at their clothing, snow blinding them despite the lantern. Colton kept a firm grip on Clara's arm, his body shielding her as much as possible from the worst of the gale. The barn door was partially blocked by what they soon discovered was the cause of the crash. A massive pine had fallen, its trunk smashing through part of the barn roof. Inside, the horses whinnied nervously, and the milk cows lowed in distress. "We need to move them to the south end," Colton shouted over the wind whistling through the damaged roof. "It's still intact there." For the next hour, they worked together to relocate the animals, Colton handling the more skittish horses while Clara led the gentler ones and the cows. She worked without complaint, her hands numbing despite her gloves, her face stinging with cold. When the last animal was settled, Colton surveyed the damage grimly. "Roof's going to need major repairs, but it can wait until the storm passes. South end should hold." He turned to Clara, concern evident in his expression. "You're freezing. We need to get back to the house." The return journey seemed even more difficult, the wind having strengthened during their absence. Halfway across the yard, Clara stumbled, her feet numb and clumsy in the deep snow. Colton caught her before she could fall and, without hesitation, swept her into his arms. "Colton, put me down, you can't carry me through this," she protested. "Watch me," he replied, his voice grim with determination as he forged ahead, holding her against his chest. By the time they reached the house, they were both half frozen, their clothing crusted with ice. In the kitchen, Colton set Clara down carefully before building up the fire to a roaring blaze. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," he said, practical despite the intimacy implied. "You change upstairs. I'll find something here." Clara nodded, too cold to argue. In her room, she struggled with buttons and laces, her fingers still numb and clumsy. After several frustrating minutes, she heard a knock at her door. "Clara, are you all right?" Colton's voice was concerned. I'm having some difficulty, she admitted reluctantly. My fingers won't cooperate. A pause, then. May I help you? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications beyond the immediate need. Clara hesitated, then made her decision. Yes, she said softly. Please. Colton entered cautiously. He had changed into dry trousers and a clean shirt, his hair still damp from melted snow. He approached Clara with the same care he showed toward skittish colts, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Tell me what you need, he said, his voice gentle. The buttons, Clara murmured, turning slightly to show the long row down her back. I can't manage them. Colton's fingers were surprisingly deft as he worked each tiny button free. His touch was clinical, respectful, yet Clara felt her pulse quicken at his proximity, at the warmth of his breath against her neck. When the last button was undone, he stepped back immediately. There. I'll wait downstairs while you change. The consideration in the gesture, his immediate withdrawal to preserve her modesty, touched Clara deeply. Thank you, she said, turning to face him, for everything, for helping me in the barn, for carrying me through the snow, for being you. Something shifted in Colton's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she had glimpsed only rarely. You were magnificent out there, Clara. Most city women would have collapsed in hysterics at the sight of that fallen tree, but you just set to work, doing what needed to be done. Pride and admiration shone in his eyes. I couldn't have asked for a better partner. The word partner echoed between them, rich with meaning. Not just wife, not just helper, but partner, equal, valued, essential. Clara felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. This man, this good, honorable man who had given her nothing but respect and kindness since the moment she stepped off the train, had come to mean more to her than she had ever thought possible. Colton, she whispered, her voice unsteady. Would you stay? After I change, I mean. I don't want to be alone tonight. His eyes widened slightly, searching her face to ensure he understood her meaning. Are you certain, Clara? There's no rush, no obligation, I'm certain, she interrupted gently. Not from obligation or gratitude, but because I want to be with my husband. Because I've come to care for you in ways I never expected to care for anyone again. The confession hung between them, not quite a declaration of love, but approaching its borders. Colton stepped forward slowly, raising a hand to cradle her cheek with infinite tenderness. I'll wait for you downstairs, he said softly. Take your time. Whatever happens or doesn't happen tonight, Clara, know that you've already given me more joy than I ever thought to find in this life. He left then, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara stood motionless for a long moment, her heart racing with anticipation and a strange, sweet certainty. Whatever fears she had harbored about this aspect of marriage had dissolved in the face of Colton's consistent respect and care. She trusted him with her body, with her future, perhaps even with her heart. When she descended the stairs some time later, dressed in her warmest nightgown with a woolen shawl around her shoulders, she found Colton waiting in the parlor, the fire burning high in the grate. He rose when she entered, his eyes warm with affection and barely banked desire. I thought we might have some tea, he said, gesturing to the service he had prepared, to warm us completely. Clara smiled at the thoughtfulness. Tea would be lovely. They sat together on the sofa before the fire, closer than their usual positions, their shoulders touching. The simple contact sent warmth through Clara that had nothing to do with the tea or the fire's heat. I've been thinking, she said after a comfortable silence, about what you said the night we were married, about being the first truth I know. Colton turned slightly toward her, his expression attentive. Yes, I think perhaps you are, Clara continued, finding courage in his steady gaze. These months with you have shown me that not all men make false promises, That honor and kindness can be real, not just pretty words meant to deceive. She took a deep breath. You've kept every promise you made to me, Colton, and given me so much more than I ever expected. Colton set his teacup aside, taking her free hand in both of his. Clara, from the moment I read your first letter, I sensed you were someone special, someone who had seen hardship but retained her strength and dignity. I hoped we might build a good life together, a comfortable partnership. His voice deepened, grew more intense. What I didn't expect was how quickly you would become essential to me, how empty the house feels when you're not in it, how I find myself looking forward to evenings by the fire with you more than any other part of my day. He raised her hand to his lips, placing a kiss on her palm that sent a shiver of pleasure through her. I'm falling in love with you, Clara Quinn. Maybe have been since you stepped off that train and told me so firmly that love was a lie. The declaration, spoken with such simple honesty, broke the last of Clara's resistance. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow but of wonder, of joy too vast to contain. I never thought to hear those words again, she whispered. Never thought I would want to hear them, but from you. She touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. From you, I believe them, and that terrifies me almost as much as it thrills me. Colton turned his head to kiss her fingertips. Being terrified and thrilled at the same time, that's a fair description of love, I think. A laugh escaped Clara, watery but genuine. Is it? I have so little experience with the real thing. We'll learn together, Colton promised, drawing her closer, day by day. When his lips met hers, it was with the same gentle respect as their wedding kiss, but this time Clara responded with newfound courage, her arms sliding around his neck to draw him nearer. The kiss deepened, transformed from tentative exploration to mutual discovery, to shared hunger. Later, much later, as they lay tangled together in Colton's bed, Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but within these walls, within the circle of Colton's arms, she had found a sanctuary she had never thought to discover. I think I love you, she murmured against his skin. I'm still afraid to trust it completely, but I think I do. Colton's arms tightened around her, his lips pressing a kiss to her hair. Then that's the beginning of our truth, my Clara, the first of many we'll discover together. Spring came to Montana with explosive beauty, the world transforming from white to green almost overnight. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, birds returned to build nests in the eaves, and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the pastures. For Clara, it was a season of renewal in more ways than one. Her marriage to Colton had blossomed fully in the months following the blizzard. What had begun as a pragmatic arrangement had evolved into a deep, abiding love based on mutual respect, shared laughter, and passionate devotion. Each day brought new discoveries: Colton's unexpected fondness for poetry, Clara's hidden talent for sketching, the ways their bodies fit together in perfect harmony. At the school, Clara had become a beloved teacher, the children responding to her firm but kind guidance. Many of the older students, particularly the girls, looked to her as a model of what a woman could be: educated, respected, strong in her own right while part of a loving marriage. It was late May when Clara made a discovery that would change their lives forever. She had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks, with occasional bouts of nausea in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to the busy schedule of teaching and ranch life, but when she confided in Mrs. Abernathy, the older woman smiled knowingly. "Sounds to me like you might be expecting, dear," she said, patting Clara's hand. "My sister's a midwife over in Bozeman. Want me to ask her to come take a look at you?" The possibility sent a wave of emotions through Clara: fear, excitement, wonder. A child. their child, the ultimate expression of the love that had grown between them. Mrs. Abernathy's sister confirmed what Clara had begun to suspect. She was approximately 3 months along, with a baby due in late November. Telling Colton became a moment Clara would cherish forever. She waited until evening after supper, when they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice soft with contained joy. Colton turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it?" "We're going to have a child," Clara said simply. "In November, according to Mrs. Prescott." For a moment, Colton seemed frozen, his eyes wide with shock. Then, with a whoop that startled the nearby chickens, he lifted Clara from her chair and spun her in a circle, his face alight with joy. "A baby," he breathed when he finally set her down, his hands gentle on her waist. "Our baby." "You're pleased, then?" Clara asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Pleased?" Colton laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "Clara, you've just given me the greatest news of my life." His expression softened, grew more serious. "A family of our own, something I never thought I'd have." He knelt suddenly, pressing a reverent kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your mother and father can't wait to meet you." The tenderness in the gesture brought tears to Clara's eyes. This man, this wonderful man who had shown her that love could be real, would be the father of her child. It seemed miraculous, all of it, from the moment she had stepped off the train into this new life. The months of Clara's pregnancy passed in a blend of anticipation and preparation. Colton insisted she reduce her teaching to just 1 day a week as her condition advanced, though Clara negotiated for 2, unwilling to abandon her students entirely. At home, the ranch hands treated her with a blend of awkward reverence and protective concern that Clara found both amusing and touching. Daniel Morgan, in particular, appointed himself her unofficial guardian, ensuring she was never without help when needed. When Clara asked him about it one day, the weathered foreman ducked his head in embarrassment. "Mr. Quinn saved my life once," he admitted. "Got caught in a blizzard 3 years back, would have frozen solid if he hadn't come looking for me. Told him then I'd repay the debt someday." He glanced at her growing belly. "Figure making sure his wife and child are looked after is the best way to do that." Such loyalty was a testament to Colton's character, and Clara found herself collecting these stories like precious gems, each one revealing another facet of the man she had come to love with her whole heart. As autumn painted the landscape in amber and gold, Clara and Colton prepared the nursery, a small room adjacent to their bedroom. Painted pale yellow and furnished with a cradle Colton had crafted himself during the long evenings. Clara sewed tiny garments while Colton read aloud from his favorite books, his deep voice soothing both her and, she fancied, the child growing within her. "What shall we name him?" Colton asked one evening, his hand resting gently on the swell of her belly. "Or her," Clara considered. "If it's a boy, I thought perhaps James, after my father." "James Quinn," Colton tested the name. "It has a good sound, and if it's a girl," Clara smiled, covering his hand with hers. "Elizabeth. It was my mother's name, and I've always thought it beautiful." "Elizabeth Quinn," Colton nodded. "A strong name for a strong daughter." "She would be with you as her father," Clara said softly. Colton's eyes grew serious. "I never told you much about my father, did I?" "Only that he was a rancher in Texas, and that he taught you the basics before he died," Clara replied, curious about this rare reference to Colton's past. Colton was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. He was a hard man. Not cruel exactly, but unyielding. Demanded perfection, gave little praise. He looked down at their joined hands on Clara's belly. "I always swore that if I ever had children, I'd be different, that I'd make sure they never doubted they were loved." The vulnerability in his voice touched Clara deeply. "You will be the finest father, Colton Quinn. This child is fortunate indeed to have you." Colton's smile returned, tender and genuine. "And doubly fortunate to have you as a mother. Beautiful, brilliant, and brave. I hope our daughter inherits every one of your qualities. And if it's a son, then I hope he has your integrity and your compassionate heart," Colton replied without hesitation. As November approached, preparations intensified. Mrs. Prescott, the midwife, came to stay at the ranch 2 weeks before Clara's expected due date. The weather cooperated, remaining unusually mild for late autumn, with clear skies and moderate temperatures. Elizabeth Quinn was born on November 12, 1879, after 18 hours of labor that tested Clara's endurance to its limits. Colton remained nearby throughout, pacing the hallway when banished by the midwife, holding Clara's hand and murmuring encouragement when permitted at her side. When at last their daughter made her entrance into the world, squalling indignantly at the indignity of it all, Clara felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. The tiny, red-faced infant was placed on her chest, and Clara marveled at the perfection of miniature fingers and the wisps of copper hair that proclaimed her father's daughter. "She's magnificent," Colton whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed down at them both. "Just like her mother." "Would you like to hold your daughter, Mr. Quinn?" Mrs. Prescott asked, her capable hands already bundling the baby in a soft blanket. The look of terror and wonder on Colton's face as he carefully cradled Elizabeth was something Clara knew she would remember all her days. His large, calloused hands that could break a wild horse or haul a fallen tree held their daughter with exquisite gentleness, as though she were spun from the most delicate glass. "Hello, Elizabeth," he murmured, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. "I'm your pa. And I promise you right now that you will never doubt how much you're loved, not for a single day of your life." The vow, spoken with such heartfelt intensity, brought tears to Clara's eyes. In that moment, watching her husband with their newborn daughter, Clara realized how completely her life had transformed since that cold autumn day when she had stepped off the train in Whiteridge. She had come as a mail-order bride, convinced that love was a fiction invented to deceive naive women. She had come seeking only security and escape, her heart carefully guarded against disappointment. And she had found against all expectation, against her own determined skepticism, a love so genuine and so profound that it had healed wounds she had thought would pain her forever. 5 years later, spring 1884, the Montana morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the curtains of the bedroom where Clara Quinn lay curled against her husband's side. At 30, she had settled comfortably into her life as wife, mother, and respected member of the Whiteridge community. The last 5 years had brought changes both to the town and to the Quinn family, all of them welcome. Whiteridge had grown into a proper small city, with a brick schoolhouse, a small hospital, and even a library that Clara had helped establish. The Quinn Ranch had prospered as well, expanding its operations to include sheep as well as cattle, with Colton's innovative breeding programs drawing attention from as far away as Denver. But the greatest joy had been watching their family grow. Elizabeth, now 5, was joined by 3-year-old James and 6-month-old Sarah. Each child brought new delight and new challenges, but Clara found motherhood to be the most rewarding role she had ever undertaken, particularly with a partner as devoted as Colton. As if sensing her thoughts, Colton stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Good morning, Mrs. Quinn," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Quinn," Clara replied, the exchange a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. Colton propped himself on one elbow, looking down at her with the same admiration that had marked his gaze from the beginning. At 35, he was in his prime, still powerfully built from daily ranch work, but with threads of silver beginning to appear at his temples that Clara found unreasonably attractive. "What's that smile for?" he asked, tracing her lips with a gentle finger. "I was just thinking how distinguished you look with a touch of gray," she teased. Colton groaned dramatically. "Distinguished is just a polite way of saying old." "Nonsense. You're like a fine wine, improving with age." Clara reached up to touch his face, her expression softening. "And I fall more in love with you with each passing year." The words, once so difficult for her to say, now flowed easily. Time had proven Colton's constancy, his love for her only deepening as they faced life's challenges together. The fears that had once constrained her heart had long since melted away, replaced by absolute trust in the man who had kept every promise he had ever made to her. Colton leaned down to kiss her, a lingering embrace that still sent warmth spreading through her veins. "I love you, Clara Quinn," he murmured against her lips. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by the patter of small feet in the hallway, followed by a stage whisper that was anything but quiet. "Lizzie, Pa said not to wake them." James's voice carried clearly through the door. "I'm not waking them," Elizabeth responded with the impeccable logic of a 5-year-old. "I'm just checking if they're awake already." Clara and Colton exchanged amused glances before Colton called out, "We're awake, cubs. You can come in." The door burst open immediately, and their older children tumbled into the room, followed more sedately by Mrs. Abernathy carrying baby Sarah. In the 5 years since Clara's arrival, the housekeeper had become more like family than employee, her affection for the Quinn children as deep as any grandmother's. "These two have been up since dawn," Mrs. Abernathy reported with mock severity. "Someone might have mentioned there are presents waiting downstairs." "Presents?" Clara feigned confusion. "What's the occasion, Mama?" Elizabeth's indignation was comical. "It's your special day, the day you came to Montana. Pa says we celebrate because it's when our family began." Clara's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at Colton. Each year on the anniversary of her arrival, he found some way to mark the occasion, a tradition that had begun on their first anniversary and had grown more elaborate as the children became old enough to participate. "Is that today?" Clara pretended to ponder. "I had quite forgotten." "You did not forget," James declared with certainty. "You remember everything. That's what Pa always says." Colton laughed, scooping his son into his arms. "Your mother does have an excellent memory, that's true, and she's teasing you, son." The family made their way downstairs, where the table was set for breakfast, and several packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with colorful ribbons waited on the sideboard. Clara suspected Eliza Parker's involvement in the wrapping. Her friend had a talent for making even simple materials look festive. After a breakfast of pancakes and fresh berries, Clara's favorite Colton insisted she open her gifts. From Elizabeth came a carefully pressed flower arrangement, preserved between sheets of waxed paper. From James, a slightly lopsided clay pot he had made with Mrs. Abernathy's help. From baby Sarah, a soft knitted blanket that Clara knew Eliza must have helped create. "They're all perfect," Clara declared, hugging each child in turn. "I shall treasure them always." "There's one more," Colton said, producing a small leather-bound book from his pocket. "This one's from me." Clara opened it to find a journal, its pages filled with Colton's neat handwriting. The first entry was dated the day of her arrival in Whiteridge. "I've kept it since the day you stepped off that train," Colton explained quietly. "Just notes about our life together, moments I wanted to remember." Clara turned the pages, glimpsing entries about their wedding, their first Christmas, the births of their children, and countless smaller moments, the first time Clara had successfully ridden a horse alone, the day Elizabeth had taken her first steps, the night they had danced under the stars on their third anniversary. "Colton," she whispered, overcome. I don't have words." "Read the last entry," he suggested, his eyes warm with love. Clara turned to the final written page, dated that very morning. "6 years ago today, I waited at Whiteridge Station for a woman I knew only through letters. I hoped for a companion, a partner to share my life and work. What I found was the other half of my soul. Clara Vaughn Quinn came to Montana believing love was a lie. My greatest achievement in this life has been showing her that love, true love, is the most powerful truth in existence. With each passing year, each child born of our union, each challenge faced together, that truth has only grown stronger. I thank God every day for sending her to me, for giving me the chance to be the first truth she knew. And I promise, with all that I am, to spend the rest of my days ensuring she never has reason to doubt again." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she closed the journal and looked up at her husband, this remarkable man who had transformed her life with his steadfast love and unwavering honesty. "You have kept that promise," she said softly, mindful of the children watching with curious eyes. "Every single day." "And I always will," Colton replied, his voice carrying the same certainty it had that first day on the dusty road to the ranch. "That's one truth you can count on, Clara Quinn. Always and forever." As their children clamored for attention, and the day's activities began in earnest, Clara held the knowledge of that truth close to her heart. She had come to Montana, a woman broken by disappointment and disillusionment, convinced that love was nothing but pretty lies told to mask selfish intentions. She had found instead a love that was as solid as the mountains surrounding their home, as constant as the stars that guided travelers through the darkest nights, as real and vital as the air she breathed. Colton Quinn had promised to be the first truth she knew. He had become instead the central truth of her existence, the foundation upon which she had built a life of joy, purpose, and profound contentment. And in that truth, Clara had found the greatest blessing of all, the courage to believe, to trust, and to love without reservation. As she watched her husband swing their daughter into the air, her son clinging to his leg and baby Sarah cooing in her basket, Clara offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the advertisement that had brought her west, for the courage that had allowed her to step onto that train, and most of all, for the man who had met her with honest eyes and an open heart. The mail-order bride who had thought love was a lie had found, in the arms of a Montana rancher, the most beautiful truth of all.